I'm standing inside a UK ambassador's residence in Bangkok as we have been given a great opportunity by His Excellency Asif Ahmad to answer questions from the Thai public as well as from the expat community in Bangkok. However, due to our limited time, we cannot go through most of the questions, but don't worry, some of your questions will be answered by the embassy, which will be published on our website later. Thank you, Your Excellency, for giving this interview opportunity to answer questions from the Thai public as well as from the expat community. The good news is we have a lot of feedbacks, and 90% has something to do with the embassy's consular work. And I have to tell you that there are quite a number of complaints as well. But first of all, would you like to say something about this interview, which you said has something to do with Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II's birthday?
Well, this year we are celebrating the Queen's birthday party on the 19th of October in Bangkok, primarily because in the period that we would have otherwise celebrated it, marking her own birthday in April, then we had the royal wedding of Prince William and the Duchess of Cambridge, as she has now become, and it would have clashed with that. And we have a wonderfully accommodating Queen in a sense that she actually, her official birthday is always celebrated in June to allow for better weather in the UK. Right. And this year I asked Her Majesty for special permission to hold the event in October because of we wanted to separate the two celebrations. The other reason for choosing October, of course, is that we wanted to await the outcome of the elections here. And that gives us an opportunity to include members of the new government as it has now emerged in our guest list, as well as, of course, our friends from the opposition and other friends in Thailand. So I think for us, it's good that we have this opportunity to celebrate, but celebrate at a time of our choosing. And I'm very grateful to Her Majesty for allowing us that flexibility.
The first questions, we should go straight into the questions. The first questions comes from Alexander Schieber. U.S. citizens, his question is, U.S. citizens and businesses enjoy considerable special privileges under the Treaty of Amity. What are the UK government doing about securing a similar treaty for UK citizens and businesses? Or is it something the European Union should be addressing?
Sure, no, I think that's a very interesting question, and it's a very broad question. And I thank Alexander for it. What it is that every country within the EU makes up its own mind about whether or not to sign a treaty of amity and cooperation. And we've looked at this from time to time. I think historically, the problem has been that we've not been able to treat ASEAN as a group and to say we want to treat each member of ASEAN in the same way. And until ASEAN's integration became more clear and some of the political issues started to become more clear, it was difficult for the United Kingdom to come to a decision that this was the time to sign a treaty of amity and cooperation. But there's a lot of active thinking going on as we speak in London about whether the time is now right to do so. And I think there will be an announcement on this very soon.
Right. Next, there are a lot of questions concerning the visas and passports. Among those who asked Andrew Cherry, Duncan Burgin, Gary Thomas, Derek Bingham, and lots more. Let me summarize their questions for you. The first one, why is taking quite a process to pass a passport? Even people in emergency complain they had to wait and sometimes overstay. Can the process be shortened to like a week or in 3 days?
Now, I can see why this is a key issue of concern for British citizens, primarily because Thailand is such an attractive location for many. There are some 51,000 British citizens living here, so the volumes are large. And if you take Asia as a whole, I think the trend is very much on a rising one. But there are other great pockets of British community requiring services from the government through the embassies and through the passport service. Australia is another good example. Now, the passport as a document, those of our citizens who remember the old blue passport, was a relatively simple document. It was almost like printing a book. It had very few security features.
Right.
Sadly, nowadays, identity fraud is rife. The passport has become a very important document of identification, giving people access to many things, including air travel, as well as other services from banks. So the integrity of the document has to be maintained. Mm-hmm. And we're also updating the technology that is embedded in the passport. As a result of that, it has become increasingly obvious to us that we cannot have a printing workshop in every single embassy around the world.
Right.
Although we have a very large network, one of the largest networks of embassies of any country in the world because of our global position, to do this, from embassy to embassy is, I think, a big ask. And secondly, of course, it has always been more expensive to issue a passport abroad than it is to issue in the UK. So I think that's the reason why the document has become complex, and therefore we are increasingly moving the passport production to the UK, and there'll come a time when passports will be printed only in the UK, and we'll be using a courier system to do this. Now, I can understand why for British people living in Thailand, losing their passport or not having a travel document for 4 weeks can be troublesome. And one exception we've made for Thailand is that a British citizen here can continue to hold their British passport and only send us a photocopy. That means that they can then comply with Thai law, which is that they must be able to produce a passport at any given time. So that's one adjustment that we have made. I think that with the time that we allow is more precautionary. More often than not, our citizens are finding that the passports are actually returned quicker than that, but I can't offer that as a guarantee. But my personal view is this, that as the concentration of passport production in the UK becomes more viable and the technology gets better and they can process volumes and use the web-based data transfer more frequently and more accurately, I think the turnaround time will steadily go down. And in fact, I, together with many of my colleagues who are fellow ambassadors in the region, have been in contact with the UK Passport Agency on this very point, that business people travel frequently and that they should have access to their passports more readily. The other issue, of course, is that some people say, well, okay, but they can't wait for a month before they can travel. You can have a document, but what do you actually do? For people who are active business people for whom travel around the region, in Europe, etc., is vital, provided that they can convince us through a letter from the employer that this is a legitimate a requirement, then a person can actually hold more than one passport. There's a complication with that, of course, which is that the Thai visa permit is only on one or the other, but that's for something that for an individual passport holder to juggle. But I do understand, as a frequent traveller myself, where your pages get filled up very, very rapidly, that this is a continuing problem, and I think it is important that we hear this sort of feedback from our citizens and that we continue to look for ways of shortening the timescale.
Speaking of which, we have a lot of feedbacks from the outsourcing service as well. A lot of feedbacks has something to do with the rigidity.
I think you're talking about the visa service, which is what we've outsourced. With the visa service, we're a victim of our success, which is that Thai people now are traveling to the UK in greater numbers.
Right.
Last year, we had a 20% increase in the number of applications. 93% of those visa applications for tourism were approved. And they were approved, if you look at the statistics going back to only last August, although we say that it can take anything up to 3 weeks to issue a visa, the statistics show that 95% of the visas were approved within 5 days.
Right.
Now that is good by any standard, but I can't, again, guarantee that every Thai will get a visa within 5 days or even get a visa at all. That's subject to their profile. But I think to understand what we've done, firstly, the visa facilitation service does not make the decisions. The visa decisions are made by UK officers in the embassy here.
All right.
That's number one. Number two, go back to the time when people had to queue outside Wutayu in the rain, in the heat, sometimes in the hope that all they'll get in their hand is an application form.
Right.
And then they'll find out how many photographs they need, they'll correct money, they'll go back, they'll queue up again. And this thing was, I think, a very inefficient and a very poor reflection of our country. You go to the visa facility service now, it's an air-conditioned room, you book your time online, so you have certainty when you see the visa officer. There are people there who can process the payments. If you haven't got the right payment, you can go to a nearby bank, get the bank draft, come back in and put it in, and then you go there and you collect it when you know exactly when your visa is going to be ready, and you can use the website to track specifically where your application has
I
gone.
used to do that.
Yeah. So, overall, I think that the Thai traveling public is getting a better service than before. And the proof is the fact that we are processing more visas quickly.
Excellent. Next question, this is from Mr. Duncan. He wants to know how much money the consular section get from British citizens each year.
I can understand the sentiment behind that question. I think there's a feeling a lot of my citizens have when I talk to them, and I've been to many of the places where British people are living, whether it's in the north of the country or in the south or even in Isan. And I think they think that, well, for a simple letter confirming somebody's status, for a simple, what they think might be just a photocopy document, why is the embassy charging what it is charging? There are two reasons for it. One is that the fees for consular services are set globally. And we don't have a cheaper version in Thailand and a more expensive version in Japan. There's a uniform fee. And the logic behind that is twofold. One is that we should not rely on the ordinary taxpayer of Britain to subsidize the fact that people are living or traveling abroad. It's the overseas citizen who has to meet the full cost of the consular service. And the total revenue that we generate simply defrays the cost. And that goes back to the other explanation I was giving as to why are we printing passports in the UK. Had we continued down that track, the passport would be probably a £300 passport, because that's how much it would cost. By the time you have UK people living abroad on expat terms, as any British company here would be paying for their staff, the costs start to ratchet up. Our obligation in embassies is to ratchet down on these costs, and because of the budget constraint that we have, that is exactly what we're doing. We are doing more with less money. But the overall philosophy